Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in Freshman English. We are in the MyPerspectives Unit 5. We're now looking at the great Ngugi Wachiano's The Return. I'm with you on page 650 where we learn a little about Ngugi Wachiano. Born in 1938 in Kenya. As a young boy, he lived through the Mau Mau Rebellion. His first play, The Black Hermit, was a major success. His unsparing but accurate account of life in the dictatorship of post-colonial Kenya, Petals of Blood, landed him in prison in 1977. After his release, the government issued a warrant for his arrest. Ngugi chose exile instead, fled to the United States. Ngugi has received numerous honors and taught at a number of major universities. Now, this is a very interesting story for us to read in our study of the Odyssey, The Return. Let's get a little bit of background information on page 651. The British colonial government controlled Kenya, the setting of this story, from the late 19th century until 1963. In 1952, this government declared a state of emergency in order to violently suppress the Mau Mau Rebellion, an anti-British uprising by the Gikiku ethnic group. Over 20,000 Gikiku were imprisoned by the government, and over 10,000 people lost their lives during the fighting. Now, good readers always scan a text before they start reading. Notice I'm with you on page 655 in paragraph 33. It's not a long story, but it is going to demand some concentration. We're going to ask you to consider, as we annotate, the ways in which this story plays very similar thematic kinds of games as Homer's Odyssey. All right, so let's pay attention, enjoy the reading, come back to work levels 1, 2, and 3.
By Ngugi Wachiano. The road was long. Whenever he took a step forward, little clouds of dust rose, whirled angrily behind him, and then slowly settled again. But a thin train of dust was left in the air, moving like smoke. He walked on, however, unmindful of the dust and ground under his feet. Yet with every step he seemed more and more conscious of the hardness and apparent animosity of the road. Not that he looked down. On the contrary, he looked straight ahead, as if he would, any time now, see a familiar object that would hail him as a friend and tell him that he was near home. But the road stretched on. He made quick, springing steps, his left hand dangling freely by the side of his once white coat, now torn and worn out. His right hand, bent at the elbow, held onto a string tied to a small bundle on his slightly drooping back. The bundle, well wrapped with a cotton cloth that had once been printed with red flowers, now faded out, swung from side to side in harmony with the rhythm of his steps. The bundle held the bitterness and hardships of the years spent in detention camps. Now and then he looked at the sun on its homeward journey. Sometimes he darted quick side glances at the small hedged strips of land, which with their sickly-looking crops, maize, beans, and peas, appeared much as everything else did, unfriendly. The whole country was dull and seemed weary. To Kamau, this was nothing new. He remembered that even before the Mau Mau emergency, the over-tilled Kikuyu holdings wore haggard looks in contrast to the sprawling green fields in the settled area. A path branched to the left. He hesitated for a moment and then made up his mind. For the first time, his eyes brightened a little as he went along the path that would take him down the valley and then to the village. At last, home was near, and with that realization, the faraway look of a weary traveler seemed to desert him for a while. The valley and the vegetation along it were in deep contrast to the surrounding country. For here, green bush and trees thrived. This could only mean one thing. Honia River still flowed. He quickened his steps, as if he could scarcely believe this to be true, till he had actually set his eyes on the river. It was there. It still flowed. Honia, where so often he had taken a bath, plunging stark naked into its cool living water, warmed his heart as he watched its serpentine movement around the rocks and heard its slight murmurs. A painful exhilaration passed all over him, and for a moment he longed for those days. He sighed. Perhaps the river would not recognize in his hardened features that same boy to whom the riverside world had meant everything. Yet as he approached Honya, he felt more akin to it than he had felt to anything else since his release. A group of women were drawing water. He was excited, for he could recognize one or two from his ridge. There was the middle-aged Wanjiku, whose deaf son had been killed by the security forces just before he himself was arrested. She had always been a darling of the village, having a smile for everyone and food for all. Would they receive him? Would they give him a hero's welcome? He thought so. Had he not always been a favorite all along the ridge? And had he not fought for the land? He wanted to run and shout, "Here I am, I have come back to you." But he desisted. He was a man. "Is it well with you?" a few voices responded. The other women with tired and worn features looked at him mutely, as if his greeting was of no consequence. Why, had he been so long in the camp? His spirits were damped as he feebly asked, "Do you not remember me?" Again they looked at him. They stared at him with cold, hard looks. Like everything else, they seemed to be deliberately refusing to know or own him. It was Wanjiku who at last recognized him, but there was neither warmth nor enthusiasm in her voice as she said, "Oh, is it you, Kamau? We thought you—" She did not continue. Only now he noticed something else. Surprise? Fear? He could not tell. He saw their quick glances dart at him, and he knew for certain that a secret from which he was excluded bound them together. Perhaps I am no longer one of them, he bitterly reflected. But they told him of the new village. The old village of scattered huts spread thinly over the ridge was no more. He left them, feeling embittered and cheated. The old village had not even waited for him, and suddenly he felt a strong nostalgia for his old home, friends, and surroundings. He thought of his father, mother, and he dared not think about her. But for all that, Muthoni, just as she had been in the old days, came back to his mind. His heart beat faster. He felt desire, and a warmth thrilled through him. He quickened his step. He forgot the village women as he remembered his wife. He had stayed with her for a mere 2 weeks. Then he had been swept away by the colonial forces. Like many others, he had been hurriedly screened and then taken to detention without trial. And all that time he had thought of nothing but the village and his beautiful woman. The others had been like him. They had talked of nothing but their homes. One day he was working next to another detainee from Moronga. Suddenly the detainee, Nairohe, stopped breaking stones. He sighed heavily. His worn-out eyes had a faraway look. "What's wrong, man? What's the matter with you?" Kamau asked. "It is my wife. I left her expecting a baby. I have no idea what has happened to her." Another detainee put in, "For me, I left my woman with a baby. She had just been delivered. We were all happy, but on the same day I was arrested." And so they went on. All of them longed for one day, the day of their return home. Then life would begin anew. Kamau himself had left his wife without a child. He had not even finished paying the bride price. But now he would go, seek work in Nairobi, and pay off the remainder to Muthoni's parents. Life would indeed begin anew. They would have a son and bring him up in their own home. With these prospects before his eyes, he quickened his steps. He wanted to run, no, fly, to hasten his return. He was now nearing the top of the hill. He wished he could suddenly meet his brothers and sisters. Would they ask him questions? He would, at any rate, not tell them all. The beating, the screening, and the work on roads and in quarries with an askari always nearby ready to kick him if he relaxed. Yes, he had suffered many humiliations, and he had not resisted. Was there any need? But his soul and all the vigor of his manhood had rebelled and bled with rage and bitterness. One day these Wazungu would go. One day his people would be free. Then, he did not know what he would do. However, he bitterly assured himself no one would ever flout his manhood again. He mounted the hill and then stopped. The whole plain lay below. The new village was before him, rows and rows of compact mud huts, crouching on the plain under the fast vanishing sun. Dark blue smoke curled upward from various huts to form a dark mist that hovered over the village. Beyond, the deep blood-red sinking sun sent out finger-like streaks of light that thinned outward and mingled with the gray mist shrouding the distant hills. In the village, he moved from street to street, meeting new faces. He inquired. He found his home. He stopped at the entrance to the yard and breathed hard and full. This was the moment of his return home. His father sat huddled up on a three-legged stool. He was now very aged, and Kamau pitied the old man. But he had been spared. Yes, spared to see his son's return. "Father." The old man did not answer. He just looked at Kamau with strange, vacant eyes. Kamau was impatient. He felt annoyed and irritated. Did he not see him? Would he behave like the women Kamau had met by the river? In the street, naked and half-naked children were playing, throwing dust at one another. The sun had already set, and it looked as if there would be moonlight. "Father, don't you remember me?" Hope was sinking in him. He felt tired. Then he saw his father suddenly start and tremble like a leaf. He saw him stare with unbelieving eyes. Fear was discernible in those eyes. His mother came, and his brothers too. They crowded around him. His aged mother clung to him and sobbed hard. "I knew my son would come. I knew he was not dead." "Why? Who told you I was dead?" "That Karanja, son of Ngugi." And then Kamau understood. He understood his trembling father. He understood the women at the river. But one thing puzzled him. He had never been in the same detention camp with Karanja. Anyway, he had come back. He wanted now to see Muthoni. Why had she not come out? He wanted to shout, "I have come, Muthoni! I am here!" He looked around. His mother understood him. She quickly darted a glance at her man, and then simply said, "Muthoni went away." Kamau felt something cold settle in his stomach. He looked at the village huts and the dullness of the land. He wanted to ask many questions, but he dared not. He could not yet believe that Muthoni had gone. But he knew by the look of the women at the river, by the look of his parents, that she was gone. "She was a good daughter to us," his mother was explaining. "She waited for you and patiently bore all the ills of the land. Then Karanja came and said that you were dead. Your father believed him. She believed him too, and keen for a month. Karanja constantly paid us visits. He was of your Rika, you know. Then she got a child. We could have kept her. But where's the land? Where's the food? Ever since land consolidation, our last security was taken away. We let Karanja go with her. Other women have done worse, gone to town. Only the infirm and the old have been left here." He was not listening. The coldness in his stomach slowly changed to bitterness. He felt bitter against all the people, including his father and mother. They had betrayed him. They had leagued against him, and Karanja had always been his rival. 5 years was admittedly not a short time, but why did she go? Why did they allow her to go? He wanted to speak. Yes, speak and denounce everything. The women by the river, the village, and the people who dwelled there. But he could not. This bitter thing was choking him. You gave my own away," he whispered. "Listen, child." The big yellow moon dominated the horizon. He hurried away, bitter and blind, and only stopped when he came to the Honya River. And standing at the bank, he saw not the river, but his hopes dashed on the ground instead. The river moved swiftly, making ceaseless, monotonous murmurs. In the forest, the crickets and other insects kept up an incessant buzz. And above, the moon shone bright. He tried to remove his coat, and the small bundle he had held onto so firmly fell. It rolled down the bank, and before Kamau knew what was happening, it was floating swiftly down the river. For a time, he was shocked and wanted to retrieve it. What would he show his... Oh, had he forgotten so soon? His wife had gone. And the little things that had so strangely reminded him of her and that he had guarded all those years had gone. He did not know why, but somehow he felt relieved. Thoughts of drowning himself dispersed. He began to put on his coat, murmuring to himself, "Why should she have waited for me? Why should all the changes have waited for my return?"
Now, of course, the brilliance of this story is that we'll title the story Return, and this is, of course, the last word of the story. Of course, Camus and his return home to Muthoni, and she's not there because of the rival in Karanja, is going to be at the central theme of this story, no question. But I want us to focus real quickly on the powerful symbolism. Notice all of the symbols of this story. Let's put them in our notes. Notice that we have the road, which is repeated. Did you see this at 2b? The repetition of the word the road. The first sentence, the road was long. The last sentence of paragraph 1, the road stretched on. Hey, do you remember what we said about varying sentence length? Notice the first sentence, very short, the road was long. The second sentence, whenever he took a step forward, little clouds of dust rose, whirled angrily behind him, and then slowly settled again. Longer sentence, notice that varying of sentence length. Just one more reason that we think of Ngugi as such an important writer for us. Notice everything by paragraph 2 is unfriendly, and yet we have the bundle, which will be the important symbol at the conclusion of the story that ultimately is going to fall into the river and drift away. That bundle, of course, representing all of the dreams, all of the hopes. Finally, in paragraph 3, he's at home, and we think of Odysseus in Ithaca at 3a, and more particularly the Hoina River, which is going to be that symbol, although it's a serpentine river, like a serpent, right? Which means there's going to be some meandering, and maybe we would argue some good and some bad that will be a part of this. He wonders if he's going to get the hero's welcome, or if he's in fact totally forgotten. And it is in fact the secret that we'll see in paragraph 5 that kind of awakens him to something is absolutely not right about all of this. Like Odysseus, at the conclusion of paragraph 7, while he was away, we're told all he thought about was his beautiful woman. Of course, we're going to learn in this story that his Penelope did not wait for him at all. She, in fact, well, she waited, but then she, of course, decided to marry another because of the rumor that he was, in fact, dead, which is, of course, exactly the Penelope motif, is it not, right? Finally, the return will happen. He does have the dream in paragraph 13 that life indeed is going to begin anew. There were so many humiliations as he was away, but now finally in paragraph 14, 15, he will be finally free. His first sight of home, much like Odysseus' first sight of Ithaca, is going to be a powerful moment, and then he sees his father. Much like Odysseus and his father, the father initially doesn't recognize him, and he'll ask him in paragraph 21, "Don't you remember me?" And then, of course, there will be the recognitions, first by father, then by mother. Notice it's mother who's going to make the revelations that, in fact, Muthoni did wait, but then she was told that you were dead, and therefore Karanja got your wife and, had a child, and now they're gone. Notice we're told in paragraph 29 that the bitterness now will begin to just eat him up. First turning him cold, he has been totally betrayed. We're told the bitter thing at the conclusion of paragraph 29 is choking him, right? Of course, what to do next? Back to the river he goes, and it's at that moment that the bundle will in fact fall off, right? It rolls down the bank, and then it's floating swiftly down the river. Symbolically, of course, this is the old life that he is losing. His wife is gone. And yet, ironically, instead of thinking to maybe commit suicide and kill himself, he decides that maybe he's relieved, and he begins to put on his coat, murmuring to himself, "Why should she have waited for me? Why should all the changes have waited for my return?" Much, of course, can be made of these final rhetorical questions. Marcus Aurelius, a 3a observation, said, "Soon you will have forgotten all things, and all things will have forgotten you." Certainly, this is a story that plays that game. At 2a, what is for you a primary message here? Life goes on, life is unfair, life is suffering, life is painful. We've mentioned at 2b the power of symbolism and varying sentence length. At 3a, obviously the Odyssey is the classic text. Notice here, we will have Kamau, who will return to his Ithaca, and his Penelope is gone, and he has no ability to be able to get any kind of vengeance. Finally, at 3b, what's a time in your life when you had to deal with this kind of injustice? When, in fact, it wasn't fair, it wasn't right, and yet you somehow had to find a way to kind of get through, to let the bundle go, that is to say, to let go and to somehow endure. What's a time in your life when you had to endure that? And maybe a personal question as well. Do you feel at all that Muthoni did what she had to do, or do you rather have some kind of resentment towards her for deciding to go ahead and marry Karanja and to continue with her life? And then finally, of course, what do you think Kamau is going to do next in his life? Well, there you go, a powerful short story. I hope that you'll be led to read more of Gucci's great stuff. Thank you.